Hello, today I am here with a video on reading habit and listening habit. These are two major things we need to look at when we talk about learning English or learning any language for that matter. But here, our interest being in learning English, I am going to talk a bit about developing a reading habit, and for those who already have, to say hi to them and to appreciate them for that, and also about the importance of watching movies and listening to music in relation to language learning. So let's go and see how these things are. Would be the ideal way to sharpen our English skills? That's a question I'd like to raise. So there are options. There may be other options as well, but take a course in spoken English. They are a big rage these days. You have spoken English courses everywhere. Will you be able to sharpen your English skills by taking a spoken English course? Will a good grammar book help you? Could you sharpen your language skills reading a grammar book? Or there are so many books out there about how to learn English. Will they help you? And there are also umpteen YouTube channels and software and packages that promise to teach you English. Well, what is the best way? Well, there is nothing wrong with any of these ways that I have put up here, and also things that I have not. Online platform learning English is all good. They're all good. But today I mean to discuss a few very sure things, very holistic things, and very organic things that will never fail you in your attempt to sharpen your English language skills. So let us look at that. So the first thing, this is something that we have to do. Learning a language is something, of course, we are not really talking about learning English at this point. We are talking of, building on the English that we already have. I'm very sure we all have considerable knowledge in English. But English being an international language, and English also being a language that we are currently using for our professional needs, I think we need to look at it from that angle rather than learning, like, sharpening our arsenal. That's why I use that word. You have weapons with you which you will need in your life, and we are thinking of how to sharpen them. So the first I have given as the vital verbal input, VVI, vital verbal input, which is in the first verbal input would be reading. Well, nothing I say is going to be new, but I am talking more in relation to my experience as a learner of English and as a teacher of English. So I believe that the most vital input would be reading. Now, why did I talk about input? We have to use language. That would be the output part. So for your output to be good, you need to have good input. We all know that. And the most vital verbal input I would say would be reading. There is no question about that. So the first aspect I'd like to discuss is why read. So many young people, in all generations, ask, why should I read books? Well, I have finished my course, and now why should I read books? Well, that's a big question to which I'm trying to answer. Reading has multiple benefits. We'll look at it from the limited use, which is learning language. The other uses are even bigger, I would say. But today we'll be keeping in mind our pragmatic need for learning English for professional purposes, and also to widen our linguistic knowledge. That would kind of help in the growth of our growth as individuals as well. Well, I would say in terms of acquiring the language, improving the language, the most important component is certainly reading. Here I have said that the reading gives you a very contextual exposure to language. people talk about the best way to learn a second language. English is second to us because we finished learning Tamil, Hindi, or Malayalam first, and we are attempting, or we have attempted English after that. So we need to have a considerable amount of exposure to the language and a lot of practice in that. And this practice has to be contextual, which is very, very important to us. We are talking about linguistic input, and the best way to learn a language is to learn it naturally. And the most natural way of learning language is through reading. And through reading, you are improving your grammar. You don't need a grammar book to teach you English. Your reading will teach you English grammar. You don't need a special book on vocabulary. Your reading will give you vocabulary. Your knowledge of the current idiom of the language, I'll talk more about idioms in a while. Again, you will get through reading, your wide reading, and also you will have your spelling is something that we have a problem with, particularly in English language, because we have this singular spelling system that English has. Spelling also is learned through reading. Well, doesn't it sound brilliant? Reading has so many benefits only in relation to learning the language. But that is not the only benefit that reading has. A larger benefit, a long-term benefit of reading is cultural familiarity. Let me talk a bit about why and what cultural familiarity is and why should it be there. English is, as we know, today you can say that English is our language. Certainly, you can say English is one of Indian languages. We have a particular pride in our English. Most of our people are going to work in a virtual environment where they need to come into direct contact with people living in other parts of the world. I wouldn't say people living in England or USA, living in England or USA, but in the other parts of the world where English language becomes a medium. And because language is very closely related to culture, language is the product of culture. Our language, our English is the product of our culture. We have many features of our culture. So my English will be highly flavored by my South Kerala culture. And so many sentences, many words that we use will have a cultural flavor, and a cultural familiarity is very essential. We often talk about reading books written in India, created by Indian writers, because that's a culture that is familiar to us. It is fine. To learn language in the primary level, that will be very helpful. But after that, I would say you need to become familiar with the culture of English-speaking communities other than in India. So reading books written by people in different parts of the world, which is available in English, will give you a lot of cultural familiarity. That takes us to the important point called global understanding, which is very much in need today, not only for understanding the global communities, but not only to ensure peace and ensure mutual tolerance, etc. Global understanding will also widen our minds and give you a better language to engage with the global community more meaningfully. So, cultural familiarity is one big advantage of reading books. So here, very often our language is the language, I mean our English, is the English we learn from our textbooks. And this textbook English is actually an English which is never spoken anywhere for actual communication. So English has to be very current. And idiom is something that a feature of language that gives you the current feel of the language. Because language is something that constantly changes. People, you would have noticed that in Tamil or in our Indian languages as well, the kind of language that people speak, particularly in informal occasions, keep changing. The slangs that we have, the colloquial expressions that we have, keep changing. The same way idiom also changes. Idiom means expressions in English which are not directly related to the suggestions of the words themselves. The meanings will be different. The words will, for example, I say I'm as cool as cucumber. Cucumber is a vegetable which has nothing cool about it. But that's an expression that we have. It means he is perfectly calm. I am as cool as cucumber. Well, in the same way, there can be many idiomatic expressions. So the richer your language will be when it becomes more idiomatic. Look at these idiomatic expressions that I've just put down here. Painting the town red. It'll look as if you're going to have a paint bucket and walking around the town, but it means have a lot of fun. And stoned. This is an expression the other day in the class. A student was saying he looks a bit stoned. Well, it means that he looks as if he is drunk. Well, the boy wasn't drunk, poor guy. He was a bit tired, but that was the expression his friends used. He looks stoned. It means he looks intoxicated. And another student of mine sometimes talks about being quite miffed about something. Miffed. A formal expression would be, I am annoyed. She was rather annoyed. But here, miffed is an idiomatic expression. Most of these idiomatic expressions are used in informal context. When you write a letter to your boss, you won't say that, sir, I am rather miffed. You wouldn't say that. But in colloquial, everyday speech, we need to keep this in mind. We need English for our everyday speech with our colleagues, with our customers, or with our clientele, or whoever it is. When we talk comfortable in informal occasions, you need a kind of English. You also need a different kind of English, which we use in formal professional occasions. So these are idiomatic expressions that will make your informal conversation very rich. Okay. So, when pigs fly would be something that is impossible. To break a leg, again, another idiomatic expression. Literally, you go and, when somebody is going to perform, you say break a leg. And then literally, if you study, you will really go and break a couple of legs and get into serious trouble. But breaking a leg means perform well. See the difference between the actual meaning and the literal sense. And then stew in one's own juices. Another good example. Getting into trouble because of something that we ourselves have done. Stew in one's own juices, which goes back to making a roast. When you cook a roast, people who make roast, they kind of allow it to stew in its own juice. The juice that comes out of the roast, it will also become part of the meal. Well, that's an analogy, but the meaning that the expression has today is to, suffer the consequences of your action. Well, a piece of cake, something easy. Here on the grapevine, this is an actual expression that an English friend of mine used, and I did not know at that time, and I looked up in the dictionary. Here on the grapevine means, I heard so. It's a gossip. It's something that people are talking about right now. Fly off the handle to become very angry. Well, I'm just displaying a spectrum of idiomatic expressions to tell you that through reading books, and what we are going to read, we'll discuss shortly. Through reading, we update the idiomatic flavor of our language. Here, we are talking about English. And what to read? That's another big problem. Very often people ask, what shall I read to improve my English? I would say you read what you like. So, there are many myths about developing reading habits. So, teachers, my teachers have suggested that you read the newspaper, you read the editorial part of the newspaper, you read great books written by great masters like Discovery of India, My Experiments with Truth, an autobiography of Ambedkar, etc. It's all brilliant ideas. Just as I said in the beginning, you can learn English in many ways. You can read also many things, but when you try to read something that is very uninteresting, particularly for you, you may not read a lot. Our intention is to read a lot. Here, by reading, I do not mean reading your textbook. I mean reading extensively. Many of us might know these two expressions, extensive reading and intensive reading. Intensive reading is to understand your textbook, while extensive reading is where we actually learn language. When we engage with the language and we have fun with the language, and that language seeps into you, and that is where you really learn language through reading. And for that to happen, you must read what you like. Here we are talking about reading for fun. And what kind of books do you read? One thing you need to keep in mind is read what you like. Don't read something simply because somebody else liked it. It may not work with you. Why I'm saying is, you take a book, you start reading, you find it awfully boring. and you will take a year to finish that book. Sometimes you will stop reading half the way, and it's 6 months. Well, I would say that in 6 months, read maybe 20 books. So how do you do that? So read books that you like, and also read books that suit your level. Say you are a 20-year-old person, but your Tamil level, your intellectual level is very high. Your mother tongue is, you're very good in your mother tongue, your intellectual level is very high, you're a very good student, but your English level may not be that high. It's perfectly natural for that to happen because we live in another country and English is not our mother tongue and we are not exposed to English to that high level. So, suppose you are not able to read a book at all, then why don't you read children's stuff? Read Shikari Shambhu, for example. Here you see Donald Duck comics. I used to read Donald Duck comics. This is from cartoon, but movie, but there used to be plenty of, before the television age and before the internet age, we had only all these things only in the form of books. And so Donald or Shikari Shambhu or any book that your brother or your sister in school reads, and if you feel that is your right thing, read it. You don't have to prove to anybody that you're going to read a big novel. So suppose your friends are leaving high stuff, it's okay. You will also reach that through constant effort. When you start reading the comics and picture books, you're not going to be stuck there forever. You will soon graduate into better, higher books. So my recommendation, read books that you like and read books that suit your level. If you're old, but if your language level is not that high, no problem. Read books meant for children. I would always recommend people who want to develop a reading habit, read children's book first. Have fun with that. And then gradually, without anybody's recommendation, you will certainly shift to the next level. Well, here I have given two other books which I enjoyed reading. This 100-year-old man who climbed out of the window and disappeared. This book is a sensational book, which is not very difficult to read. That's why I'm recommending you. Try to read that. But open the book and you read one page, you don't like it. 2 pages, again, you may not like it. Because of big cultural unfamiliarity, you may have problem in reading an international book. So read page number 3, read page number 4, read 5 or 6 pages before you decide whether not to read the book or not. After reaching page number 10, you still find it awfully boring, not your stuff, just leave it and take up another book. But don't make that a habit. But so sometimes reading would be a very difficult thing. Those who haven't read a book fully yet, do that. Take a book and read. Take a book which is simple and read. The pleasure of completing a book is very great. So this is for the very few of you who haven't yet begun reading. So those others I know, we all have larger reading habit. But even if you don't have a reading habit, you can begin anytime. But it's an important thing that you should begin that as soon as possible. Well, here is another book which I enjoyed reading. It's not exactly a novel. It is Bill Bryson's A Walk in the Woods. Well, just suggesting all these things. These are fun reading for enjoyment, but it has the indirect impact of improving your language a lot. And another and equally important or vital verbal input is listening. We all know that, listening. And what do you listen to? And I look at that sentence I've written here is, watching movies is the counterpart of reading books. So a person living in the 21st century, it's very important to watch movies as well. Movies are literary works, they're cultural works, which have in them encoded a lot of important things that we need to know. Particularly about English movies, I would say watch movies that, again, just as I said about novels, the kind of movies that you like and the kind of movies that you are able to enjoy. But unlike books, movies, because we are adults, I believe all of us are adults here, we'll be able to enjoy and appreciate any movie. The language may be a little difficult in the beginning, but slowly you will pick it up. There are questions like whether we should watch with the subtitles on or not. Well, there are no rules to that. It's up to you. A lot of freedom we have about choosing how to watch a movie. Anyway, movies too give us all the benefits of reading books. You get cultural information. You get a lot of language in context. Very absolutely important to listen to, learn. Visualize or see or hear language used in context, which will give you further opportunity to practice and use in your, make it your own. Well, coming to another part of listening, in the first slide I talked about only about movies. Movies are visuals; they are predominantly visual entertainment. So your attention will be, a large chunk of your attention will be taken by the visual aspect. Your brain will be processing the visuals simultaneously. But when you go to the next level of listening, well, you need to watch, use, it's very convenient to listen to music. One thing, this here I am talking about music. Music and songs. Music would be a very general term. I'm talking about English songs, not the heavy metal type with a lot of crazy sounding instruments, but I'm talking about songs which are more quiet, which the lyrics you can listen to. So listening to song is something you can do much easier than watching a movie. You don't need a visual display for that. You listen to English songs, make it a habit. Well, that again will be very, very rewarding. Listening to music, that's, you can listen to any English music, international. We no longer talk about listening to British English. We now know that there are so many varieties. In America itself, there are hundreds of different kinds of English spoken in different parts of the country. So the time is gone when you talk about ideal kind of English. That is not there. You just expose yourself to all kinds of English and develop your own English, which is intelligible to others. So that we need to look at when we talk about pronunciation. Hopefully, your language need not be American, need not be British, need not be Australian. It need not be any have any particular label. It just need to be intelligible. The others should be able to understand you when you articulate these words. You should improve your pronunciation and accent to such a level that everybody will understand when you speak. Secondly, in our professional context, because people respect you assess you by the language you speak, your language has to be, what shall I say, a bit acceptable in that sense as well. Very regional kind of accents may not be acceptable. You may be misunderstood. So try to develop a neutral kind of English. In order to to attain that, particularly in the spoken part, listening is an input which the direct output would be spoken, which is more important to us. Listening is our strong base. Reading is our strong base. Now we come to a more practical thing. That is listening, where you listen and get a lot of input, which should help you become excellent speakers. So what do you listen? You listen to all kinds of English. So thank you for listening. We looked at the input aspect, which is reading and listening. Perhaps in another video, we will look at the output parts, which is speaking and writing. See you soon.